I went to sleep thinking the hardest part of the weekend was already behind me. We'd all made it to the wedding estate without drama. The welcome dinner hadn't turned into a family feud, and Zoe, my sister, my lifelong rival, had barely spoken to me, which honestly felt like a gift. The venue was stunning. Clara, my cousin, had rented out an estate in the mountains for the whole weekend. Think elegant stone courtyards, glass conservatories, antique chandeliers. Everything was curated, tasteful, expensive. It was the kind of place where you felt like something magical or terrible might happen. I remember walking into my guest room for the first time and thinking, I've never stayed somewhere like this. Tall windows with flowing white curtains, a soaking tub, a four-poster bed with velvet pillows, and in the center of the room, hanging from the armoire, was the dress I planned to wear to the wedding the next day. Deep sapphire, off the shoulder, sleek without being flashy. It made me feel beautiful, and that was a rare thing. Lately, I'd been taking care of myself more, investing in clothes that fit right, skincare that worked, hair that felt healthy and polished. It wasn't about vanity. It was about finally showing up as the woman I wanted to be. After years of blending in, I was done shrinking. The last time most of the extended family had seen me, I was still awkward, unsure, barely making eye contact at holidays. But now, I was proud of who I'd become. I had a career I loved, friends who saw me clearly, and for once, I felt like I belonged at the table. That night, after the rehearsal dinner, I excused myself early. I wanted to get enough sleep, be rested, and have time to get ready without rushing. I washed my face, pinned my hair up to preserve the soft waves my stylist had done that afternoon, and climbed into bed feeling calm, hopeful. It was the last peaceful moment of the weekend. I woke the next morning with a strange feeling. Not fear, exactly, but that low-level awareness that something was off. It wasn't until I rolled over that I saw it. Hair, clumps of it on the pillow. I froze. For a moment, my mind couldn't process what I was looking at. It felt surreal, like a horror movie detail that didn't belong in real life. But then I sat up and ran my fingers through my hair. It was uneven, jagged, gone. Not just a little bit, not a trim. Someone had taken scissors to my hair. One side of my head was now noticeably shorter than the other. The delicate curls I'd gone to bed with were hacked, hanging in broken strands around my face. And I knew, without needing to think, who had done it. Zoe. There were no cameras in my room, no witnesses. But I didn't need proof. I had lived with her. I had survived her. The petty sabotage, the jealousy masked as jokes, the subtle violence that always looked like nothing from the outside. She had always known exactly how to make me feel small. She'd done it since we were kids. But this? This was a new low. I stared at myself in the mirror, trying not to cry. I had spent the last year rebuilding my confidence, slowly, quietly, and now I looked like a bad before photo. Like someone who had lost a dare, like the joke at the wedding. The door to my room was still locked from the inside. That meant she had either picked it or, more likely, used a spare key. The thought made my stomach turn. I pulled on sweatpants and a hoodie, tied my ruined hair back as best I could, and walked down the long hallway to her room. She answered on the second knock. Zoe stood in the doorway in a white satin robe, makeup already done, coffee in hand. She looked pleased. I stared at her and said, "Did you cut my hair?" She raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. Someone came into my room last night and cut it. You're the only one who would do something like that." She sipped her coffee, shrugged, and said, "Maybe you leaned on scissors. You're kind of dramatic when you sleep." I didn't respond, because the way she smiled, just slightly, just enough, told me everything. She did it. She knew she did it. And she thought I would either explode and make a scene, or melt into the corner like I used to. Instead, I just looked at her. Really looked at her. Same old Zoe. Always beautiful, always sharp, always desperate to be the center of attention. and deep down, always afraid someone might finally see through her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't let her see how deep the cut went, how humiliated, how violated I felt. I just said, "You're unbelievable." Then I turned and walked away. Let her sip her coffee and gloat. Let her think she had won. Because in that moment, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't over. Zoe had always been the firework, bright, loud, impossible to ignore. I was the quiet one, the good girl, the one who smiled politely at family dinners, got good grades, and stayed out of trouble. The one who blended into the background while Zoe shined. That was the story everyone liked to tell. They called her spirited and fun. I was sweet, stable, and sometimes, when they forgot I was in the room, forgettable. What they never saw, what they didn't want to see, was how exhausting it was to grow up in someone else's shadow, especially when that someone knew exactly how to block the light. Zoe didn't just want attention, she needed to own every room she walked into, and she couldn't stand it when someone else got even a sliver of that spotlight, especially me. It started early. I must have been 8 or 9 the first time I realized she wasn't just confident, she was cruel. That year, our school was throwing a father-daughter dance. I had picked out a soft blue dress with a satin ribbon at the waist. It was the first time I'd ever worn something I chose myself. I felt beautiful in it. The night before the dance, I laid the dress out on my bed. I woke the next morning to find it ruined. The ribbon had been snipped. Tiny, jagged holes had been cut into the back of the skirt, right where you couldn't hide it. When I ran crying to our parents, I said, "Someone cut my dress. It was fine last night and now it's ruined." Zoe, sitting at the kitchen counter with a bowl of cereal, casually said, "Maybe she caught it on something. She probably doesn't remember." My mom looked between us and asked gently, "Sweetheart, are you sure you didn't accidentally tear it?" And my dad chuckled and said, "You girls and your drama." Zoe got grounded for 2 days, barely a slap on the wrist. I missed the dance entirely. She never apologized. She never even looked sorry. In high school, it got worse. Zoe started wearing my clothes without asking. If I told her to stop, she'd roll her eyes and say, "You weren't going to wear it right anyway." At the dinner table, she'd talk over me or correct me mid-sentence. If I dared to speak up, she'd smile and say, "Relax, I'm just helping." When I finally landed a date with my first real crush, a boy I'd liked all sophomore year, Zoe went out of her way to meet him. Within a week, she was texting him. A week after that, they were just hanging out. When I confronted her in our shared bathroom, I asked, "Why are you doing this? You don't even like him." Zoe looked straight at me and said, "If he's that easy to steal, maybe he wasn't yours to begin with." Our parents never stepped in, not once. When I told my mom how it felt, she sighed and said, "Honey, that's just how sisters are. One day you'll laugh about all this." I didn't laugh. Instead, I got quiet. I stopped fighting. I stopped reacting. And eventually, I stopped participating. That was the beginning of the distance. I took an internship out of state the summer after sophomore year of college and never looked back. I visited home less and less. I skipped the mandatory family holidays. I learned how to build a life without Zoe, without any of them. It wasn't easy. That first year on my own, I cried more nights than I'll admit. I doubted myself constantly. I wondered if maybe I was too sensitive, maybe I was the problem. But slowly, something changed. I started therapy. I found friends who didn't just like me, they respected me. People who didn't ask me to be louder, funnier, more charming. People who loved my quiet, my depth, my stillness. I got serious about my work. I built a career I loved. Creative, fulfilling, and fully mine. I learned how to cook for one. I learned how to spend time with myself and not feel lonely. I stopped shrinking. I stopped being the version of myself they had decided I was. But none of them saw that. Not my parents, not my aunts, and definitely not Zoe. To them, I was still the nice one, the sensitive one, the sister who should just stay out of the way and not make things complicated. Which is why, when I woke up that morning with half of my hair chopped off, I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart. I stood in the mirror, staring at the damage, and I whispered, "Not this time." Then I picked up the room phone and called the front desk. A woman answered cheerfully, "Good morning, Arden Estate. How can I help you?" I said, "Hi, I'm staying in the West Garden room. I need the number for a local salon, an emergency appointment." She hesitated. "We have a few stylists we work with. Do you want someone sent here?" I said, "No, I'll go to them. I need the best one you've got." The woman replied, "Let me give you the White Fern Salon. They're 10 minutes from here, very upscale. I'll let them know you're coming." "Thank you," I said. I hung up, tied my hair back into the best low bun I could manage with the uneven length, grabbed my bag, and left without telling anyone where I was going. The White Fern Salon sat at the edge of a wooded road in a little gray cottage with ivy along the roof. It smelled like lavender, eucalyptus, and lemon oil. It was the kind of place where the chairs were velvet and the mirrors were edged in gold. A stylist named Rhea greeted me. She was tall, with cropped platinum hair and square black glasses. She didn't smile much. When I sat down and pulled off my hoodie, she ran her fingers through my hair and said bluntly, "Oh, someone did this to you." I nodded. "My sister. Last night. I was sleeping." Rhea didn't react with pity, just nodded once and said, "Wedding?" I nodded again. "Tomorrow." She tilted her head. "You ready for a bold cut?" I took a breath and said, "Do whatever you have to do. I just don't want to hide." Rhea smiled, just a little. "Good, then let's go bold. Not to cover it, to own it." She got to work. An hour and 15 minutes later, she spun me toward the mirror. Gone was the soft, wavy look I'd relied on for years. In its place, a structured chin-length bob, tucked slightly behind one ear. Clean lines, sharp angles, a bit of soft layering in the front. She had reshaped the damage into something elegant, powerful, and unapologetically grown. "There," Rhea said, brushing off my shoulders. "Now you look like the woman who's done shrinking." I stared at myself for a long time. Then I said, "Thank you." On the way back to the estate, I passed the florist unloading centerpieces. Dozens of white roses in glass vases wrapped in cream cloth. A violinist was practicing softly in the back garden. Everything was moving on, normal, calm, but I wasn't the same. Zoe had tried to ruin me, and without realizing it, she had forced me into becoming exactly the woman she'd spent her whole life trying to keep me from becoming. Weddings are built for spectacle. From the moment the first champagne bottle pops, everything becomes a performance. The outfits, the toasts, the stories people tell over canapes, it's all carefully curated. A celebration, yes, but also a kind of theater. And that morning, for the first time in my life, I wasn't watching from the wings. I arrived at the Arden Estates courtyard 30 minutes before the ceremony. The guests were still milling around, sipping mimosas and posing for photos beneath the blooming white arches. The light was golden. Everything looked like it belonged in a magazine, and yet all eyes were on me. My short haircut, angled just above the chin, structured and face-framing, felt like armor. I wore the sapphire dress Clara had helped me pick months ago, the one I'd been afraid would be too much. But now I walked into that garden like I had been born to wear it. People noticed. One of our cousins whispered, "She looks amazing," not realizing I was standing just behind him. An aunt I hadn't seen in years blinked in surprise and said, "Is that really her?" But I didn't come for validation. I came to reclaim something I'd let Zoe take from me too many times: dignity. I spotted her across the courtyard, flanked by two distant relatives, mid-laugh, her signature effortless curls bouncing as she gestured wildly with one hand. She was already in full performance mode. When her eyes found me, she froze. Just for a second, just long enough. I didn't stop walking. I didn't smile, and I didn't give her a single word. The ceremony was breathtaking. Clara looked radiant in her ivory gown, and the vows she exchanged with her now husband were raw and funny and perfect. Guests wept. Someone behind me whispered, "This feels like the kind of wedding people remember forever." But I couldn't focus, not entirely, because sitting 3 rows behind the bride's mother was Zoe, laughing, sipping rosé, wearing the same smirk she'd worn that morning when I confronted her about my hair. As the ceremony ended and guests rose from their seats, Clara made a beeline for me. She slipped her arm around mine and whispered, "Can we talk?" We ducked behind one of the rose hedges lining the courtyard, out of view, out of earshot. She asked quietly, "What happened to your hair?" I tried to brush it off. "Just decided to go shorter." Clara frowned. "No, I mean, what really happened?" I hesitated. She said, "You were glowing at the rehearsal dinner, and now you're walking like you've got something buried under your skin." I took a breath, and then I told her. I told her everything. How I'd gone to sleep early the night before, how I woke up to clumps of hair on my pillow, how Zoe stood in the doorway of her room sipping coffee and pretending she hadn't done anything. When I finished, Clara's face was blank. Then her jaw clenched. She said, "That's absolutely disgusting." I said nothing. I was still holding my hands together so tightly they'd gone cold. But Clara wasn't done. She said, "If she really did that to you?" "She did," I said quickly. "There's no one else, and she didn't even bother to deny it properly." Clara nodded once. "Then we're going to find out for sure." I blinked. "How?" Clara took out her phone. "There are cameras in the hallways, quiet ones. After that vendor theft last year, we installed motion-activated sconces with embedded lenses. The guests don't know because it's not really public, but we can check." I stared at her. "Seriously?" She gave a grim smile. "Dean handles all our security. He's discreet. I'll text him now." 20 minutes later, we were in a side office behind the estate's catering prep room, a small tech nook with 2 monitors and a man in a blazer standing guard over them. His name was Dean. Clara gestured to the screen. "Pull up the second-floor hallway, between midnight and 2 a.m. Dean clicked a few keys. The footage began to load. Clara turned to me and said quietly, "You don't have to look if you don't want to." I shook my head. "I want to see." And there it was, black and white footage, timestamps in the bottom corner. At 12:43 a.m., Zoe appeared on screen. She was barefoot, wearing her white satin robe. Her hair was still curled from the rehearsal dinner. In her right hand, something long, metallic, glinting in the low light. She paused outside my room, looked around, then opened the door and slipped inside. 2 minutes later, she came back out, tucking the object into her robe pocket and walking calmly down the hall toward her room. My stomach twisted. Clara exhaled slowly. "I cannot believe she actually—" Dean turned. "You want me to download this clip?" Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at me. I said, "What are you thinking?" She crossed her arms and said, "She tried to humiliate you in secret. We could confront her quietly, but that's not what she deserves." I blinked. "What do you mean?" Clara turned back to Dean and said, "I want this clip queued up for the reception slideshow." I stared at her. "You're serious?" I asked. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Let's give her exactly what she gave you, only in front of everyone." I swallowed hard. "She'll be furious," I whispered. Clara said, "Let her be." She turned to Dean again. "Add the clip to the tail end of the slideshow. No announcement. Just slip it in after the bouquet toss footage. Fade the music right before it rolls." Dean gave a small nod. "Understood." Then Clara looked at me again and said, "You okay with this?" I paused. Then I nodded, and I said, "Let's do it." The reception hall glittered with soft gold light. After dinner, guests drifted toward the long wooden bar for cocktails and espresso. String lights sparkled overhead. The music had softened to a mellow instrumental track, and servers began clearing plates with quiet precision. It was that in-between moment at weddings, when everyone is full and warm, not yet ready to dance, lingering in the afterglow of the speeches. Clara stood near the head table, still in her gown, holding a microphone with practiced grace. She smiled at the room and said, "Before we move into the next part of the evening, I wanted to share something special." The music faded out. Clara's voice carried effortlessly. "It's a little highlight reel, a collection of candid clips from the weekend, pulled together by the team here at Arden. Just a small thank you to everyone who helped make this weekend so magical." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. The lights dimmed. The projector flickered to life, casting soft color across the high white wall above the dance floor. The first few clips drew smiles and laughter right away. Someone tripping during the rehearsal dinner toast, the flower girl doing a full twirl and knocking over a vase, the groom caught mid-practice dance with a groomsman. A sweet video played of Clara hugging her grandmother in the garden, followed by the two of them sipping tea under the rose arch. It was warm, intimate, familiar. Zoe was near the back of the room, leaning against a column with a glass of champagne in hand. Her laughter had been the loudest during the last video. I watched her from my table, not because I was waiting for anything, but because I wanted to remember the moment before the shift, because I knew what was coming next. The music stopped. The screen went dark. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. The crowd waited. Some assumed the video had ended. Then the image flickered. New footage appeared, grainy, black and white, time-stamped in the lower corner. A hallway, muted, still. The ambient noise in the room dropped to nothing. Then, from the left side of the frame, a figure entered view. Zoe. She was barefoot, her white satin robe tied loosely at the waist, hair still curled from the rehearsal dinner. In her hand, visible even in the poor light, was a pair of scissors, long, metallic, unmistakable. She paused outside a door. My door. She looked both ways, then slipped inside. A few people in the room gasped audibly. The video continued, silent and slow. 2 minutes passed on screen. Then Zoe emerged again, calm, collected, tucking something into her robe pocket. She adjusted her hair in the sconce reflection and walked casually back down the hall. The room was dead silent. No one said a word. I felt the weight of every gaze shifting, people turning their heads toward her, whispers forming but not spoken yet. Her name passed between lips in near-silent shock. Zoe didn't move. She stood frozen in place, the champagne glass gripped tightly in one hand, eyes fixed on the screen like she was watching a car crash and couldn't look away. The video ended. No fade out, no credits, just silence. Clara stepped back up to the mic. Her voice was even. "Weddings," she said, "are about love, but they're also about truth." She scanned the crowd slowly. "And I won't let someone hurt the people I love and get away with it." Then she lowered the mic. That was all. No names, no accusations. She didn't need them. Everyone had seen it. Everyone understood. Zoe's face had gone white. Her posture, once proud and poised, collapsed in on itself. Someone near her whispered, "Oh my God." Another guest, one of the cousins who had been glued to her side earlier, quietly slipped away and moved to a different table. Zoe turned to leave. The motion was slow at first. Just 1 step, then 2. Then she pushed her glass onto a table, gripped her clutch, and stormed out through the side exit without saying a word. The heavy door shut behind her with a soft but decisive thud. I remained at my table, still, hands folded in my lap. Not smug, not smiling, just present, fully present. For the first time in a very long time. Guests didn't speak to me right away. They weren't sure what to say. A few glanced my way, surprised to see me sitting there so composed, as if they expected me to be crying or shaking or even hiding. But I wasn't. I was right where I belonged. Clara made her way toward me minutes later. She didn't say anything, just reached down and squeezed my hand. No speech, no apology, no explanation, just quiet solidarity. Some guests trickled outside to get some air. Others whispered across tables. A few tried to pivot into small talk, safe territory. But the tone had shifted, permanently. Zoe had always performed best in spaces where no one questioned her. That space was gone now. She had finally been seen. Not in the way she always craved, but in the way she most feared, and I hadn't had to say a single word. The party went on. That's the funny thing about weddings. Even after the drama, the drinks are still poured, the band still plays, someone always ends up barefoot on the dance floor by the end of the night. Zoe didn't come back. Clara never mentioned her again, and the rest of the guests? They adjusted. Slowly. Awkwardly. Some avoided eye contact, some offered timid smiles. A few, mostly the ones who had always felt Zoe's sharp edges firsthand, came over with quiet nods or gentle touches on the shoulder. Nothing too dramatic. But I felt it. The shift. The people who had once looked through me, now looked at me. And I stood tall, not because of revenge, not because of the exposure, but because I had nothing left to hide. After the slideshow, I danced. Not because I felt like celebrating Zoe's downfall, but because I felt free. Clara pulled me into the center of the dance floor and spun me under the lights. I laughed until I lost my breath. Daniel, Clara's new husband, twirled us both like we were kids again. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was pretending to belong. I belonged. Not as someone's sister, not as a pity invite, but as me. I stayed at the reception until nearly 2 a.m. Then I walked barefoot back to my room, shoes dangling from my fingers, my new haircut tousled by the wind and sweat and joy. Outside my door, I paused. The hallway was silent. The same hallway Zoe had crept down, scissors in hand, less than 48 hours before. I stood there for a moment, looking at the sconce where the camera had been hidden. I nodded once, to no one in particular, and went inside. The next morning, I had coffee on the back terrace of the estate, wrapped in a shawl, watching the early fog roll over the hills. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. It said, "I heard about what happened. Call me when you're ready. Love you." I let it sit. Then I saw I had another one, from one of our older cousins, Linda. "I'm so sorry. I should have said something years ago. I think we all saw pieces of it. We just didn't want to get involved." That one landed harder, because it was honest. Cowardly, maybe, but honest. I didn't reply. Not yet. Clara came outside a few minutes later with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to me and sat down without saying a word. After a few quiet sips, she said, "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, I actually think I am." She looked at me for a long second. I know that wasn't easy, but I couldn't let her get away with it. Not this time. "You didn't have to do that for me," I said. "Yes," Clara replied. "I did." She let the silence sit for a while. Then she said, "You know, Zoe's been like this since we were kids. I used to watch her make you feel small, and I didn't step in. Not like I should have." I looked over at her. She added, "I think I always assumed you didn't need help. You were strong in your own way, but I realize now that strength doesn't mean you should be left alone in it." That stayed with me, because for so long I'd convinced myself that not being defended was a compliment, that silence was respect, that being invisible meant I was doing something right. It wasn't. I just got good at surviving without support. But now, I was done surviving. I was ready to live. I stayed 1 extra day after the wedding. Most guests left Sunday morning. The estate felt different afterward, quieter, stripped of its performance, just stone walls and bird song. Clara hugged me before she left and whispered, "Come back here anytime. I mean it." I packed slowly, thoughtfully. As I zipped up my bag, I noticed the small velvet pouch I'd tucked into the lining on the first day, the one that held the antique comb I'd planned to wear in my hair before Zoe ruined it. I took it out, held it in my hands. Then I walked down to the riverbank near the back of the property and let the wind decide what to do with it. I opened the pouch, held the comb over the water, and let go. It sank slowly, gracefully, just like the version of me who needed to prove anything to anyone. I didn't hear from Zoe for weeks. Then, one afternoon, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't owned what she did. She'd just vanished. And now, what? She wanted a chat? No. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need anything. I deleted it without opening it. That was the closure. Today, months later, I still wear my hair short. Not because of what Zoe did, but because of what I did after. I walk into rooms differently now. I don't shrink. I don't apologize. I don't scan for approval. Some people in the family have drifted toward me since the wedding, trying to rewrite the past with warm smiles and, "You've really come into your own," compliments. Others have kept their distance. I let them all. Because I'm not interested in rejoining a family that only recognized my worth after I was dragged into the spotlight. I'm building something better now. Chosen family, boundaries, peace, people who know how to love without erasing, people who don't need to be taught how not to hurt you. And when I walk into those rooms, they see me. Not because I scream, not because I make a scene, but because I've stopped disappearing.